Every story has a moment that changes everything. And today, we're about to discover it. Victor Cole's hand slammed onto the polished mahogany table so hard that the crystal glasses rattled. The sound cut through the room like a gunshot. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Even the musicians in the corner stopped playing. For one long second, the entire dining room froze. Naomi felt her stomach tighten. Beside her, Stephen's grip around her hand became firmer. Across the table, Victor Cole stared directly at them. His face had gone red. Not the red of embarrassment, the red of anger. The red of a man who believed he had just been betrayed. Across the room, several guests lowered their eyes. Others pretended to focus on their plates. Nobody wanted to be caught in the middle of what was happening. Naomi swallowed. She had faced judgment before. She had heard whispers before. Single mothers often did. But hearing those words from the father of the man she loved felt different. It hurt more, much more. Victor pointed toward Mary. The little girl sat in her high chair, completely unaware of the storm around her. A small spoon rested in her hand. Sweet potato covered her cheeks. She looked up and smiled. That innocent smile somehow made the moment even harder. Victor shook his head. "This is who you're bringing into our family?" The room became painfully quiet. Stephen slowly stood from his chair. His jaw tightened. His eyes never left his father's. "Yes," Victor laughed once, a cold laugh. Disbelieving. "You are willing to throw everything away for this?" Naomi felt Stephen squeeze her hand. Harder, almost as if he already knew what was coming. And maybe he did, because some battles don't begin the moment people start arguing. Some battles begin long before anyone speaks. Stephen drew a slow breath. "I love Naomi." Victor's expression darkened. "I don't care." The words landed heavily. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. One woman quietly placed her wineglass down. A waiter near the wall shifted his weight nervously. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody wanted to interrupt. Stephen spoke again, stronger this time. "I love Naomi." He glanced toward Mary. "And I love Mary." The toddler suddenly banged her spoon against the tray. Tap, tap, tap. Then she giggled. A few guests couldn't help smiling. Victor didn't. His face hardened even further. "Then you've chosen them over this family." Naomi's heart began racing. The room felt smaller, hotter. Every eye seemed fixed on them. Stephen stood tall. "If that's what you want to call it." Victor's chair scraped loudly across the floor. He rose to his feet, towering, furious. Then came the moment nobody would forget. The moment that changed everything. "Fine." His voice thundered across the room. "Marry her." He pointed toward Naomi. "Raise her child." His fingers shifted toward Stephen. But from this moment forward, Victor paused. Every guest leaned forward. Every breath seemed suspended. "You are no longer my son." A gasp swept across the room. Naomi felt her chest tighten. Mary stopped tapping her spoon. Stephen didn't move, didn't blink, didn't speak. For the first time in his life, his father had disowned him. If you've ever been judged before someone knew your story, if you've ever felt unwanted in a room where you desperately hope to belong, take a second right now and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if stories about courage, family, and standing up for what is right mean something to you, please like this video. It helps YouTube share these stories with more people. And subscribe to Mr. Obama Stories so you never miss the next journey. Because what happened next changed every person in that room forever. The silence stretched. Stephen slowly looked down at Naomi. His eyes softened immediately. The anger, the tension, the heartbreak. None of it was directed at her. None of it was directed at Mary. He gently brushed a strand of hair from Naomi's face. "I'm sorry." Naomi could barely speak. Mary reached toward Stephen. "Daddy!" The tiny voice nearly shattered Stephen's heart. His eyes filled. The little girl had no idea what was happening. She only knew one thing. The man standing beside her mother made her feel safe. Stephen picked her up, held her close. And for a moment it looked like the night couldn't possibly become more emotional. Everyone thought the worst had already happened. They were wrong. Because the second shock was only seconds away. The dining room doors suddenly opened. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. A tall man stepped inside, perfectly composed, perfectly calm. The kind of calm that comes from a lifetime of carrying responsibility. His tailored suit fit flawlessly, his posture was confident, his expression unreadable. The newcomer paused near the entrance. Then he smiled. Apologies for being late. His voice was warm, steady, unhurried. Nobody recognized him immediately. Except Naomi. The color drained from her face. Stephen stared, confused. The room waited. Victor frowned. The newcomer stepped forward. One step, then another. Until he stood near the table. Then he looked directly at Naomi. His smile softened. "Hello, sweetheart." The room froze. Naomi's eyes widened. Mary suddenly clapped. The man chuckled. "Hello, Mary." Now people were staring, trying to understand, trying to connect the pieces. Victor looked from Naomi to the man and back again. Then realization hit him. His expression changed instantly. The confidence disappeared. The anger vanished. Even his posture seemed to shrink. "No," Victor whispered. The room waited. "No way." The newcomer extended his hand politely. "Good evening, Victor." Victor looked as though he had seen a ghost. His lips parted. His eyes widened. And then he spoke a name that left every guest stunned. Judge Nathaniel Harper. The room erupted into whispers. Naomi lowered her eyes. Stephen looked from her to the judge, then back again. His mind raced. The powerful man standing before them wasn't just one of the most respected judges in Virginia. He was Naomi's father, and Victor had just publicly humiliated his daughter. Welcome to Mr. Obama Stories, where stories don't just get told, they come alive. This is the home of powerful American stories, stories of struggle, success, mystery, history, and the unforgettable moments that shaped people, communities, and dreams. From inspiring life journeys to shocking real events, every story here is crafted to make you think, feel, and see the world differently. At Mr. Obama Stories, we believe every voice matters and every story carries a lesson. Whether it's motivation, history, real-life drama, or untold experiences, you'll always leave with something unforgettable. So sit back, relax, and let the story begin. Because here, every story has a meaning, and every meaning has a story. Subscribe and become part of the journey. 2 weeks earlier, long before the engagement dinner, long before Victor's anger, long before Judge Harper walked through those doors, Naomi Harper's morning started the same way it always did, with tiny footsteps. Then came a soft knock, then another, then a familiar little voice. "Mommy?" Naomi smiled before she even opened her eyes. The bedroom door slowly pushed open. Mary stood there holding a stuffed frog almost as big as she was. Her curls were a mess, her pajamas were wrinkled, and she looked very serious. "I'm hungry," Naomi laughed. Every morning, the exact same announcement, not good morning, not hello, just hungry. The little girl climbed onto the bed and immediately wrapped herself around Naomi. For a moment, Naomi simply held her daughter close. No meetings, no bills, no responsibilities, just this, just them. And honestly, those quiet moments meant more than anything money could buy. The smell of pancakes filled the small Richmond apartment. Mary sat in her booster seat, kicking her legs beneath the kitchen table. Her stuffed frog occupied the chair beside her like an honored guest. Naomi stood by the stove flipping pancakes while keeping one eye on the little girl. Single motherhood had taught her a valuable skill. Doing 5 things at once. "Mommy, Mr. Froggy wants syrup." Naomi glanced at the toy frog. "Mr. Froggy already had syrup yesterday." Mary gasped dramatically. "No, he didn't. He absolutely did." Mary narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "How do you know?" Naomi smiled. "Because I was there." Mary thought about this for a second, then nodded. "Fair point." The debate was settled. For now. Naomi placed a pancake onto Mary's plate. The little girl immediately attacked it with determination. Watching her made Naomi laugh. Life wasn't easy, not even close. There were overdue bills sitting on the counter. The rent payment was due next week. Her car had recently started making a strange sound every time she turned left. And there were days when she worried herself sick about the future. But every morning, Mary somehow reminded her what really mattered. The little girl looked up suddenly. Mommy? Yes? Are we rich? Naomi nearly dropped the spatula. Where did that come from? Mary shrugged. Tommy at school said rich people eat pancakes. Naomi burst into laughter, a real laugh, the kind that comes from complete surprise. Well, if pancakes are the requirement, then we're doing pretty well. Mary grinned proudly. Naomi sat beside her and kissed her forehead. She wished life were that simple. The truth was much different. Every month required careful planning. Every expense mattered. Every unexpected bill created stress. Still, she never allowed Mary to feel that burden. Children deserve childhood, not adult worries, not financial fears, not sleepless nights. Those belong to Naomi, not her daughter. Naomi parked outside Jefferson Elementary School. The building wasn't fancy. The paint needed attention. The playground equipment had seen better days. But Naomi loved it, because inside those walls were children who needed someone to believe in them. And she had dedicated her life to doing exactly that. The moment she entered the building, students started greeting her. Good morning, Miss Harper. Morning, Miss Harper. One little boy ran over carrying a crumpled worksheet. Miss Harper, I got an A. Naomi immediately knelt beside him. You did? The boy nodded enthusiastically. She looked at the paper. Sure enough, an A, his first one all year. Naomi held up her hand. The boy slapped it proudly. For a second, his smile lit up the hallway. Moments like that made everything worthwhile. The long hours, the exhaustion, the sacrifices, every bit of it. Throughout the morning, Naomi moved from classroom to classroom helping students. Some struggled academically. Others carried emotional burdens far heavier than children should ever have to carry. Naomi listened, encouraged, guided. Sometimes all a child needed was one person willing to hear them. And Naomi understood that better than most. Because there had been times in her own life when she desperately needed someone to listen. By lunchtime, she finally sat down with her coworker, Mrs. Albright, one of the few people who knew how hard Naomi worked. You look tired. Mrs. Albright pointed her fork at her. You need a vacation. I need a winning lottery ticket. That too, both women laughed. Then Mrs. Albright lowered her voice. So, Naomi immediately recognized that tone. What? How are things with Stephen? A smile appeared before Naomi could stop it. Mrs. Albright noticed immediately. Oh, she grinned. That good? Naomi looked down at her sandwich, trying and failing to hide her happiness. He makes life easier. Mrs. Albright raised an eyebrow. That's serious. Naomi nodded softly, because it was serious. More serious than she had expected. Stephen wasn't supposed to matter this much. Not at first. When they met, she had assumed he would eventually disappear. Most people did, especially after discovering how complicated life could be. Single mother, limited income, long work hours, no glamorous lifestyle. Nothing about Naomi screamed easy. Yet Stephen stayed, not only stayed, he showed up, again and again, for Mary, for her, for their growing little world. That meant everything. Meanwhile, nearly 1,000 miles away, Stephen Cole stared through the floor-to-ceiling windows of a corporate boardroom. The Chicago skyline stretched endlessly before him, beautiful, impressive, and completely empty. At least that's how it felt today. A dozen executives sat around the table discussing projections, growth percentages, market opportunities, acquisitions, numbers worth hundreds of millions. Stephen heard every word, yet somehow none of it felt important, not compared to the photo resting beside his laptop. A photo of Naomi and Mary. Mary had ice cream on her nose. Naomi was laughing. Neither knew the picture had been taken. It was his favorite one. Stephen? He blinked. The meeting room returned. One executive repeated the question. Stephen answered automatically. The discussion continued, but his attention drifted once more. Something had changed inside him during the past year. Success no longer felt satisfying by itself. Money no longer impressed him. The private jets, the luxury homes, the expensive restaurants, they felt incomplete. Because achievement means very little when there's nobody waiting to celebrate with you. When the meeting finally ended, Stephen remained seated. The room emptied slowly, one by one, until only silence remained. He looked at the photograph again, then smiled, for the first time all day. Back in New York, Victor Cole sat inside his office on the top floor of Cole Enterprises. The office was enormous. Glass, steel, power. Everything reflected success, exactly how Victor liked it. A senior executive handed him a report. Victor barely glanced at it. His attention remained fixed elsewhere. On Stephen, his son, his heir, the future of the company. Victor had spent decades building an empire, long nights, risky decisions, personal sacrifices. Every choice had been made with one goal in mind, creating a legacy, and Stephen was supposed to continue it. That had always been the plan. Victor trusted Stephen's intelligence, trusted his leadership, trusted his business instincts. What he didn't trust were emotions. Love complicated people. Love distracted people. Love made smart men make foolish decisions. Victor had witnessed it countless times, which was why Stephen's growing attachment to Naomi worried him. A lot. Victor didn't know much about her yet, only enough to raise concerns. Single mother, school counselor, ordinary background. Victor couldn't understand what Stephen saw. More importantly, he couldn't understand what Stephen was risking. Late that evening, Stephen finally returned to Richmond. The drive felt longer than usual. Maybe because he was tired. Maybe because he had spent the entire trip thinking. The moment he parked outside Naomi's apartment, however, everything changed. The stress disappeared. The pressure faded. The loneliness eased. A small figure suddenly appeared at the window. Mary. The toddler practically pressed her face against the glass. Then she vanished. Seconds later, the apartment door flew open. Tiny feet raced across the sidewalk. "Daddy!" Stephen laughed. Every single time she called him that. His heart melted. Mary launched herself into his arms. He caught her effortlessly, spinning her around. Her laughter echoed through the evening air. Naomi appeared behind them, smiling, watching. For a moment, Stephen simply looked at them. No board meetings, no investors, no corporate pressure. Just this. This felt real. This felt important. This felt like home. What Stephen didn't know yet was that Victor Cole was already beginning to ask questions, and the answers he found would soon place father and son on a collision course neither of them could avoid. 3 months earlier, neither Naomi nor Stephen had any idea their lives were about to change. It happened on a Saturday afternoon in Richmond, one of those comfortable fall days when the air felt crisp and families filled the streets. The city library was hosting its annual community festival. Children painted pumpkins, local musicians played cheerful music, food vendors lined the sidewalks, parents pushed strollers beneath colorful decorations. Naomi had volunteered to help organize children's activities, which really meant spending half the afternoon chasing excited kids from one booth to another. Mary absolutely loved it. The little girl had already collected a balloon, a sticker, a toy whistle, and enough candy to fuel a small army. "Mommy!" Mary pointed excitedly. "Pumpkins!" Naomi laughed. "We already painted one. Another one." "Of course." Mary grabbed her hand. The case was closed. Another pumpkin it would be. As they walked toward the painting station, Naomi noticed a young boy crying near the fountain. The child couldn't have been older than 6. Tears streamed down his face. People walked past him. Some looked concerned. Others simply continued on. Naomi immediately knelt beside him. "Hey there!" The boy sniffled. "My mom is gone." His voice trembled. Naomi's heart sank. The poor child was terrified. "Okay." Her voice remained calm, gentle. "We're going to find her." The boy wiped his eyes. "You promise?" Naomi smiled. "I promise." Mary stood beside her quietly. Even she seemed to understand something important was happening. For the next several minutes, Naomi stayed with the boy, comforting him, asking questions, helping him remember where he last saw his mother. Eventually, she spotted a frantic woman searching through the crowd. The moment their eyes met, relief flooded the woman's face. She rushed forward. "Oh my God!" She pulled her son into her arms. The little boy immediately started crying again, this time from relief. The mother looked up at Naomi. "Thank you." Naomi smiled. "He's very brave." The woman nodded repeatedly. "I don't know what I would have done." After another heartfelt thank you, the family disappeared into the crowd. Naomi stood, brushing dirt from her jeans. "Good job, Mommy." Mary's tiny voice made her smile. "You helped too." Mary puffed out her chest proudly. At that exact moment, someone nearby noticed the entire interaction. Stephen Cole. He had been standing near a coffee cart holding a hot chocolate. Originally, he had attended the festival for business reasons. A local charity sponsored by Cole Enterprises had partnered with several community organizations. His appearance was mostly ceremonial. Smile, shake hands, take photographs, leave, simple. At least that had been the plan. Until he saw Naomi. There was something different about her. Not because she was trying to attract attention, actually the opposite. She hadn't even realized anyone was watching. She simply saw a frightened child and helped. No cameras, no audience, no personal benefit. Just kindness. Real kindness. The kind that couldn't be faked. Stephen found himself watching as Naomi fixed Mary's jacket, then crouched down to tie her shoe. Then listened attentively, while Mary explained something very important about pumpkins. The entire scene felt ordinary, yet somehow impossible to ignore. Before he realized it, he was walking toward them. Naomi looked up, their eyes met. For a second both paused. Not dramatically. Not like something from a movie, just long enough to notice each other. Stephen smiled first. "That was really nice." Naomi blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The little boy," Stephen nodded toward the fountain. "You handled that well." Naomi glanced back. "Oh." She smiled politely. "He was scared." Stephen laughed softly. "As if that explanation covers all of it." Naomi shrugged. "What else was I supposed to do?" That answer surprised him. Most people would have listed reasons, explained themselves, taken credit. Naomi genuinely seemed confused by the question, as if helping someone was the most natural thing in the world. Stephen extended his hand. "Stephen." "Naomi." Their hands met briefly. Then Mary stepped directly between them. Stephen looked down. The little girl was studying him carefully, very carefully, almost like a detective. Naomi immediately recognized the look. Mary was evaluating him. The toddler pointed at his hot chocolate. "What's that?" Stephen smiled. "Hot chocolate." Mary considered this information. "Can I have some?" Naomi covered her face. "Oh no." Stephen laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd had all week. "Nice to meet you too." Mary grinned. A few minutes later the three of them somehow ended up sitting near the fountain, talking. At first it was casual, simple, comfortable. Naomi learned Stephen worked in business. Stephen learned Naomi worked at a school. Neither revealed much. Neither felt the need to impress the other. And that made the conversation surprisingly enjoyable. When Mary accidentally dropped her balloon, Stephen chased it halfway across the plaza. The little girl laughed so hard she nearly fell over. When he returned victorious with the balloon, Mary looked at him differently, with trust. Children often made decisions about people very quickly. And Mary had apparently reached a conclusion. Stephen was acceptable, very acceptable. Over the following weeks they kept running into each other. A coffee shop, a community fundraiser, a local bookstore. Then eventually, actual plans. Coffee became lunch. Lunch became evening walks. Evening walks became regular weekends together. Slowly, naturally, without pressure, without games, without pretending to be someone else. For Naomi that mattered, because life had already taught her how quickly people could disappear. Promises were easy, consistency was rare. Stephen proved himself through actions, not words. When Mary got sick, he showed up with soup. When Naomi's car broke down, he helped without making her feel helpless. When work exhausted her, he listened, really listened. Weeks passed, then months. One Saturday morning they visited a park along the James River. Mary was determined to master her tricycle. The process wasn't going well. The little girl became frustrated after nearly tipping over. "I can't do it." Stephen knelt beside her. "Sure you can." "No." "Yes." "No." Stephen leaned closer. What if we both prove ourselves wrong? Mary frowned. That sounded confusing, which immediately got her attention. Stephen held the handlebars. One more try, Mary sighed dramatically, then tried again. This time she moved forward. A little, then farther still. Soon she was riding, actually riding. The little girl shrieked with excitement. Naomi laughed from the nearby bench, watching them together, watching Stephen run alongside Mary, watching Mary's confidence grow. And in that moment, something shifted inside Naomi. Not because Stephen was wealthy, not because he was successful, not because he said all the right things, because he showed up, again, and again, and again. The same realization was happening to Stephen. Every time he spent time with Naomi and Mary, leaving became harder. The quiet apartment, the bedtime stories, the movie nights, the ordinary moments, those were becoming the best parts of his life. One evening, while helping Mary build a tower from toy blocks, Stephen suddenly heard a tiny voice. "Daddy!" The block in his hand froze. The room went silent. Mary continued stacking blocks, completely unaware of what she had just done. Naomi looked up immediately. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. Stephen swallowed. For a second, emotion caught him completely off guard. Mary smiled. "Daddy, help." No hesitation, no confusion, just trust, pure trust. Stephen slowly picked up another block and helped her finish the tower. But later that night, long after Mary fell asleep, long after Naomi walked him to the door, Stephen sat alone in his car, thinking, because somewhere along the way, without even noticing, Naomi and Mary had become more than people he cared about. They had become family. And for the first time in years, the future didn't feel empty anymore. It felt hopeful. What neither of them knew was that a proposal, a family conflict, and the most important dinner of their lives were coming much sooner than either expected. The weeks that followed felt different. Not because anything dramatic happened, not because there was some grand declaration. It was the small things, the ordinary things, the things that quietly become important before anyone realizes it. Stephen found himself looking forward to Richmond more than any board meeting. Every Friday afternoon the anticipation started. The final emails, the final phone calls, the final meeting. Then the drive. Every mile brought him closer to Naomi and Mary, closer to the life that was beginning to matter more than everything else. One Friday evening, Stephen arrived carrying a pizza box almost as large as Mary. The moment she saw him, she squealed, "Pizza!" Stephen laughed. "I haven't even put it down yet." Mary grabbed his hand. "Hurry!" Naomi stood in the doorway shaking her head. "You'd think she hadn't eaten all day." Mary looked offended. "I had breakfast." Stephen nearly choked laughing. Naomi covered her smile. Life felt easier around him. Not perfect, just easier. That mattered. Inside the apartment, the three of them squeezed around the small dining table. The space wasn't large, the furniture didn't match perfectly, the apartment wasn't luxurious, yet Stephen found himself smiling more there than anywhere else. Mary sat between them, talking endlessly. Most of it made very little sense. Neither adult cared, they listened anyway, because to Mary, every story mattered. Halfway through dinner, Mary suddenly pointed at Stephen. "You're coming tomorrow too." Stephen glanced at Naomi, then back at Mary. "Am I?" Mary nodded confidently. "Yes." "What if I have plans?" "You don't." Naomi burst out laughing. Stephen held up both hands. "Well, that's settled." Mary returned to eating, completely satisfied. The child had spoken. The decision was final. Later that night, after Mary had fallen asleep, Stephen and Naomi sat on the apartment balcony. The city lights glowed softly in the distance. Neither spoke for a while. The silence felt comfortable. The kind that only happens when two people genuinely enjoy being together. Stephen leaned back. "You know what's strange?" "What?" "I spend all week around people." Naomi listened. "Meetings, investors, executives, clients." He smiled softly. "And somehow I feel less alone sitting here." Naomi looked at him. Really looked at him. There was no performance, no image, No executive mask, just Stephen, a man trying to build a life that felt meaningful. She reached for his hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally. Neither needed to say anything else. The moment said enough. As autumn slowly turned colder, their relationship became part of everyday life. Saturday mornings, Sunday dinners, walks through Richmond, trips to local parks, movie nights, library visits, school events. Stephen wasn't visiting anymore. He was becoming part of the routine, part of the family. And people were beginning to notice. At Jefferson Elementary, Naomi's co-workers quickly realized something had changed. The difference showed in her smile. The difference showed in her energy. The difference showed in the way she glanced at her phone whenever Stephen sent a message. One afternoon during lunch, Naomi caught herself smiling at a photograph. Mrs. Albright noticed immediately. There he is again. Naomi looked up. What? The smile. Naomi laughed. What smile? The Stephen smile. Naomi shook her head. There is no Stephen smile. There absolutely is. Naomi tried to argue. She lost. Mostly because she was smiling too much. Even students noticed. One little girl asked Naomi if she was getting married. Naomi nearly dropped her coffee. Why would you ask that? The girl shrugged. You look happy. The answer stayed with Naomi all day. Because happiness wasn't something she thought about very often. For years she had focused on responsibility. Work, bills, parenting, survival. Now happiness had quietly entered the picture, and she wasn't quite sure what to do with it. Across Richmond, Stephen was becoming increasingly familiar to people who knew Naomi. Store owners greeted him, restaurant employees recognized him, neighbors waved when he walked by. The wealthy executive from another world was slowly becoming part of the community. One Saturday morning, Stephen joined Naomi and Mary at a local farmer's market. Mary insisted on carrying a small basket. The basket was empty. That didn't matter. She felt important. As they walked between vendors, Mary proudly introduced Stephen to anyone willing to listen. This is my daddy. Stephen froze the first few times, then eventually stopped correcting her. Not because he felt entitled to the title, because it clearly meant something to her. And every time she said it, his heart grew heavier with responsibility. In the best possible way. By winter something else had started happening. Stephen found himself extending every Richmond visit. One extra day, then another, then another. The corporate schedule began changing. Meetings moved, trips shortened. Video conferences replaced flights. Executives started noticing. Investors started noticing. Victor started noticing. At first Victor assumed it was temporary, a phase, a distraction. But the pattern continued. One evening, Stephen canceled an important networking dinner in New York. Instead, he attended a school holiday program in Richmond. Mary stood on stage wearing a paper snowflake crown. She forgot half the words, got distracted twice, waved directly at Stephen 3 separate times, and somehow it became one of his favorite nights of the year. When the program ended, Mary ran straight into his arms. Did you see me? Stephen laughed. I don't think anybody could miss you. Mary grinned proudly. Naomi watched the exchange quietly. A warm feeling settled inside her. Not excitement, not infatuation. Something deeper, trust, the kind that takes time, the kind that can't be forced, the kind that becomes the foundation for everything that follows. What none of them realized was that every extra day Stephen spent in Richmond, every meeting he skipped, every priority he changed, was slowly setting the stage for a conflict that would soon shake the Cole family. The first real warning came on a Monday morning. Stephen was sitting inside his office reviewing quarterly reports when his phone buzzed. Victor. Stephen stared at the screen for a moment. His father rarely called without a reason, especially during business hours. He answered, Morning, Dad. Victor's voice was calm, too calm. How's Richmond? Stephen immediately knew where this conversation was heading. It's fine. A brief silence followed. Victor wasn't a man who enjoyed small talk. He preferred direct answers, direct conversations, direct control. I hear you've been spending quite a bit of time there. Stephen leaned back in his chair. Yes. Why? The question sounded simple. It wasn't. Stephen knew his father wasn't asking about geography. He was asking about Naomi, about Mary, about the life Stephen was building away from Cole Enterprises. Stephen closed the report in front of him. Because that's where I want to be. Another pause, longer this time. Victor finally spoke. I've heard about the woman. Stephen's expression changed instantly. The warmth vanished from his face. His attention sharpened. What about her? Victor ignored the question. She's a school counselor. Yes. A single mother. Stephen's jaw tightened. Yes. She has a young daughter. Yes. The conversation felt different now. More dangerous. Victor continued. And you're becoming serious about her. Stephen stood and walked toward the window. Richmond suddenly felt very far away. I'm not sure what you're trying to say. Victor's voice hardened slightly. I think you know exactly what I'm trying to say. Stephen looked down at the busy street below. People moved between buildings. Cars crawled through traffic. Life continued. Yet he could already feel a storm approaching. Say it. Victor didn't hesitate. She's not right for you. Stephen closed his eyes briefly. There it was, the judgment, the assumption, the conclusion reached before understanding. His father had always been decisive. Unfortunately, that quality often became stubbornness. What exactly does that mean? Victor sighed. As a father, I'm trying to protect you. No, Stephen's reply came quickly. You're trying to control me. For a second, neither man spoke. That alone was unusual. Stephen rarely challenged Victor directly, not because he was afraid, because it usually wasn't worth the argument. This felt different, much different. Victor's tone cooled noticeably. Everything you've built could be affected by who you choose. Stephen laughed once, without humor. Everything I've built? Yes, Stephen shook his head. You mean everything you've built? Unresolved tension sat between them. Years of expectations, years of pressure, years of Stephen trying to become the son Victor wanted. Victor finally spoke. Stephen. What? I spent decades creating opportunities for you, and I'm grateful. Then act like it. The words hit harder than Victor intended. Stephen felt it immediately, not anger, disappointment, because once again his father was treating life like a transaction. As though gratitude required obedience, as though love required approval. Stephen's voice remained controlled. I can appreciate everything you've done without letting you choose who I love. Victor's patience was beginning to disappear. Love isn't enough, Stephen smiled sadly. That's where you're wrong. The call ended shortly afterward, neither convinced the other, neither satisfied, neither willing to compromise, and for the first time, the disagreement felt personal, very personal. That evening, Stephen arrived in Richmond, carrying far more stress than usual. Naomi noticed immediately, the moment he walked through the apartment door, the moment she saw his eyes, the moment she heard his voice, something was wrong. Mary launched herself into his arms as usual. Stephen smiled, held her tightly. But Naomi could tell his mind was elsewhere. After dinner, once Mary had fallen asleep, Naomi joined him on the couch. Talk to me. Stephen stared at the floor. For several seconds he didn't answer. Then he sighed. My father knows about us. Naomi felt her stomach tighten. She had expected this eventually, just not so soon. What happened? Stephen told her everything, the questions, the judgment, the assumptions, the criticism. Naomi listened quietly. When he finished, neither spoke for a moment. Finally, Naomi looked down at her hands. It's okay. Stephen immediately turned toward her. No. Stephen, no. His voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. None of that is okay. Naomi forced a small smile. I'm used to it. The answer broke his heart. Because she meant it. Years of being judged had taught her to expect disappointment. People often saw the label first. Single mother. Then they stopped looking. They never saw the woman behind it, the sacrifices, the strength, the love. Stephen gently took her hand. You shouldn't have to be used to it. Naomi looked away. For a second she couldn't speak. Then she laughed softly, not because anything was funny, because sometimes laughing felt easier than crying. I promise I'll survive. Stephen shook his head. I know you will. His voice softened. That's one of the reasons I love you. The room became quiet. Naomi's eyes immediately found his. Neither rushed the moment. Neither looked away. Stephen rarely said those words, not because he didn't feel them, because he respected them. He didn't throw them around casually. When he said them, he meant them. Naomi's eyes glistened. She squeezed his hand, and for a moment the outside world disappeared. No Victor, no expectations, no pressure, just them. The following week made everything worse. Victor called more often, asked more questions, pushed harder. Every conversation became an argument. Every disagreement became personal. One afternoon, Victor requested a private meeting. Stephen reluctantly agreed. The meeting lasted less than 30 minutes. It felt much longer. Victor sat across from him inside the executive conference room, a place where major company decisions were made. Unfortunately, this discussion wasn't about business. It was about Naomi. Victor folded his hands. I'm asking you to think clearly. Stephen already hated where this was going. I am thinking clearly. No. Victor leaned forward. You're thinking emotionally. Stephen exhaled slowly. There it is again. What? You act like emotions are a weakness, Victor frowned. In business they are. We aren't discussing business. The room became quiet. Victor stared at him. Stephen stared back, neither willing to retreat, neither willing to surrender. Then Victor delivered the statement that changed everything. If this relationship continues. He paused, carefully choosing his words. There will be consequences. Stephen blinked. For a second he wasn't sure he heard correctly. What does that mean? Victor didn't answer directly. He didn't need to. The implication was obvious. Stephen stood immediately. His chair slid backward. The meeting was over. No. Victor looked surprised. No? Stephen's eyes never left his father's. You don't get to threaten me. Victor's face hardened. I'm your father. Stephen nodded. And I love you. His voice remained calm, controlled, steady. But you're not going to decide my future. Time and years. Father and son stood on opposite sides of something neither was willing to abandon. And far away in Richmond, Naomi remained completely unaware that Victor Cole had already started viewing her as the greatest threat to his plans. The argument with Victor stayed with Stephen for days. Not because he doubted himself, not because he questioned Naomi, because for the first time in his life, he had looked directly at his father and realized they wanted completely different things. Victor wanted a legacy, Stephen wanted a family, and those two paths were moving farther apart with every passing week. One Thursday evening, Stephen sat alone in his Richmond apartment rental overlooking the James River. The city lights reflected across the water. Traffic hummed softly in the distance. Normally, he would have been reviewing business reports, preparing for meetings, planning acquisitions. Instead, his attention remained fixed on a small velvet box resting on the coffee table. He stared at it, then smiled, then stared again. A nervous laugh escaped him. At 38 years old, a man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals, a man who could stand before shareholders without blinking, was suddenly nervous about a ring. The realization made him shake his head. Unbelievable. Yet the feeling wouldn't leave. Because this mattered, more than any business deal ever had. Much more. The following afternoon, Stephen left work earlier than usual. He drove through Richmond with a strange mixture of excitement and anxiety. His destination was familiar. A quiet stretch along the James River where Naomi often liked to walk. The place had become special to both of them. Simple, peaceful, real. Exactly the kind of place Naomi loved. As sunset approached, the river glowed beneath shades of gold and orange. The breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves. Stephen arrived first, checking his watch every few seconds, checking the ring, checking everything, then checking it all again. A few minutes later, he spotted Naomi approaching with Mary. The sight immediately calmed him. It always did. Mary was talking enthusiastically about something, probably important, at least according to her. Naomi laughed as she listened. The sound carried across the pathway. Stephen felt himself smiling. There it was again, that feeling, the certainty, the peace. The moment Naomi reached him, she tilted her head. "You look nervous," Stephen laughed. "Do I?" "Very," Mary pointed. "Your face looks funny." Naomi burst into laughter. Stephen placed a hand over his chest. "Thank you, Mary." The toddler nodded proudly, always happy to help. The three of them walked beside the river. For a while nobody mentioned anything important. Just conversation, simple moments, ordinary laughter, the kind of memories that become priceless years later. Eventually they reached a quiet bench overlooking the water. Stephen stopped walking. Naomi noticed immediately. The nervousness had returned. Her smile faded slightly. "What is it?" Stephen looked toward Mary. The little girl was busy examining leaves nearby. Then he looked back at Naomi. And suddenly every speech he had prepared disappeared. Gone. Completely gone. Which somehow made everything more honest, more real. He stepped closer. "Naomi." Her heartbeat quickened. The expression on his face told her everything, before he even spoke another word, before he even reached into his pocket. She knew. Stephen slowly lowered himself onto one knee. Naomi covered her mouth. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. Not dramatic tears, happy tears. The kind that arrive before you can stop them. The kind that come from hope, from love, from gratitude. Stephen opened the small velvet box. The ring sparkled in the fading sunlight. For a second neither spoke. The river flowed quietly behind them. The entire world seemed to slow down. Then Stephen smiled. The nervousness remained. But so did the certainty. "I love you." Naomi laughed softly through her tears. Of course he would start there. Of course. "You make every day better." His voice grew steadier. "You make me better." Naomi felt her knees weaken. "I didn't know what I was missing until I found you." A tear rolled down her cheek. Stephen continued. "I don't care about perfect." He shook his head. "I don't care about appearances." His eyes softened. "I care about you." Naomi could barely breathe. Stephen glanced toward Mary, then back to Naomi. "I love both of you." The words settled heavily between them, full of meaning, full of promise, full of responsibility. Mattered most. "Will you marry me?" For a moment Naomi couldn't answer. She simply stared at him. At the man who had chosen her. At the man who had chosen Mary. At the man who saw her value long before anyone else did. Finally she nodded, then laughed through her tears, then nodded again. "Yes." Stephen smiled. A genuine smile, the biggest one Naomi had ever seen. "Yes? Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger. Naomi immediately pulled him into a hug. Neither cared who was watching. Neither cared about anything except that moment. A second later came a small voice. "What happened?" Both turned. Mary stood nearby holding 3 leaves. Stephen laughed. Naomi laughed. Mary looked confused. "Why are you crying?" Naomi knelt beside her. "Because I'm happy." Mary considered that, then pointed at the ring. "Pretty," Stephen smiled. "It is." Mary nodded, then delivered her verdict. "Okay." Apparently the engagement had been approved. The 3 celebrated afterward with dinner at their favorite local restaurant. Nothing extravagant, nothing flashy, exactly how Naomi wanted it. Throughout the evening she kept glancing at the ring, almost as though she couldn't believe it was real. Stephen noticed every single time, and every single time he smiled. The following weeks became a whirlwind of planning. Guest lists, venues, schedules, dates, ideas, dreams. The conversation seemed endless. One evening they sat at Naomi's kitchen table surrounded by papers. Mary sat nearby coloring. Stephen studied a list. Naomi studied another. Neither appeared happy. "Why are weddings so complicated?" Stephen asked. Naomi laughed. "You're asking me? I thought saying yes was the hard part." "It was." Stephen pointed toward the paperwork. "This is worse." For the next hour they debated details, then changed their minds, then debated again. At one point Mary volunteered to help. Her solution involved balloons, a pony, and unlimited ice cream. Stephen admitted it was the strongest proposal so far. Naomi agreed. What they didn't know was that hundreds of miles away, Victor Cole had already started digging. The engagement announcement had reached him 2 days earlier. His reaction had not been positive. In fact, it had made him more determined. The relationship was becoming serious, permanent, difficult to stop, and that worried him a lot. Victor sat alone inside his office one evening reviewing information about Naomi Harper. Education, employment history, community involvement, volunteer work, professional records. The deeper he looked, the more frustrated he became, because he kept finding the same thing. Integrity, hard work, dedication, compassion. There were no scandals, no hidden motives, no suspicious history. Nothing. Victor wanted reasons. Instead, he found evidence that Naomi was exactly who she appeared to be. An honest woman raising her daughter. The discovery should have reassured him. Instead, it confused him. Because if Naomi wasn't the problem, then perhaps the problem was something else. Something Victor wasn't ready to face. The possibility that his son had simply chosen a different life, a different future. A future Victor couldn't control. Late that night, Victor leaned back in his chair, staring out at the city skyline. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his thoughts. Yet pride remained stronger. For now, and unfortunately, that pride was about to push father and son toward their biggest conflict yet. The engagement announcement spread faster than Stephen expected. Friends called, business contacts reached out, messages flooded his phone. Most offered congratulations. Not everyone did. 3 days after the engagement, Stephen arrived at Cole Enterprises headquarters for a quarterly strategy meeting. The moment he stepped off the elevator, he noticed something different. People were looking at him. Not unusually, curiously. Whispering, watching. The news had reached everyone. By lunchtime, he had already answered the same question 6 times. When's the wedding? Stephen smiled politely each time. But beneath those conversations, another reality was developing. Victor was moving, quietly, carefully, deliberately. For Victor, the problem wasn't Naomi herself anymore. His investigation had already confirmed something frustrating. She was a good person, a genuinely good person. The problem in Victor's eyes was what the marriage represented. Change, loss of influence, loss of control, a future he hadn't planned. And Victor Cole had spent decades making plans. That afternoon, Stephen entered a conference room expecting a routine business discussion. Instead, he found Victor waiting alone. The room felt unusually quiet. The large windows overlooked Manhattan. Traffic moved below. Victor stood near the glass, hands behind his back, thinking. Stephen immediately sensed trouble. You wanted to see me? Victor turned. Sit down. Stephen remained standing. I'd rather stand. Victor sighed, already irritated. The conversation hadn't even started. I've spent weeks trying to understand this. Stephen folded his arms. This relationship. Stephen's expression hardened. Naomi has a name. Victor ignored the correction. You're moving too quickly. Stephen almost laughed. We've been together for months. That's not enough. It is for me. Victor walked around the table. The engagement can still be postponed. Stephen stared at him. For several seconds he genuinely believed he had misheard. What? Victor continued. As your father, I'm advising caution. Stephen shook his head. No. Victor frowned. No? No. The answer came instantly, without hesitation, without uncertainty. Victor noticed, and it frustrated him. Because there wasn't even a crack in Stephen's resolve, not one. Think about your future. I am. Think about your responsibilities. I am. Victor's patience thinned. Think about the company. Stephen's eyes narrowed. There it is. What? The real issue. Victor looked away briefly. Stephen continued. This isn't about me. Of course it is. No. Stephen stepped closer. It's about the fact that I'm building a life that doesn't revolve around Cole Enterprises. For a moment neither spoke. The truth sat heavily between them. Victor knew it. Stephen knew it. Neither wanted to admit how much it mattered. Victor finally exhaled. You were supposed to lead this company. I still do. Not like before. Stephen remained silent, because that part was true. Not because he cared less, because his priorities had expanded. Work wasn't everything anymore, and Victor couldn't accept that. The discussion ended badly. Neither convinced the other, neither backed down. Unfortunately, that was only the beginning. During the following weeks, pressure started coming from other directions. People Stephen had known for years began offering opinions. Unsolicited opinions. One executive questioned whether marriage would distract him. Another suggested he was becoming too emotional. A third implied he was throwing away opportunities. Stephen quickly realized where those ideas originated. Victor. His father never directly ordered people to interfere. He didn't need to. His influence did the work for him. After a bored dinner, Stephen sat alone in his office replaying the conversations. The pattern was obvious. Every road somehow led back to Naomi. Every concern somehow led back to the engagement. Every criticism carried Victor's fingerprints. His phone buzzed. A photograph appeared. Naomi and Mary. They were baking cookies. Flour covered Mary's face. Naomi was laughing. The picture wasn't perfect, which made it perfect. Stephen stared at it, then smiled. Immediately, the stress disappeared. The frustration faded. The answer became simple. Very simple. A few minutes later, Naomi called. "Long day?" Stephen laughed softly. "Very. You sound tired." "I am." Naomi paused, then spoke gently. "You don't have to carry everything alone." The words settled heavily inside him, because she meant them. There was no agenda, no expectation, no hidden motive, just support. The kind of support he rarely experienced in the corporate world. Stephen leaned back in his chair. "I love you." A brief silence followed. Then Naomi smiled through the phone. "I love you too." Neither rushed the moment, neither needed to. Those words carried weight. Real weight. Stephen looked out the office window, at the city, at the skyline, at the empire his father spent decades building. Then he thought about Richmond, about Naomi, about Mary, about home. The choice wasn't difficult anymore, not even close. The next confrontation happened 4 days later. Victor cornered Stephen after another company meeting. No audience, no witnesses, just father and son. Victor spoke first. "You still have time to reconsider." Stephen closed his briefcase. "No." Victor's jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake." Stephen met his gaze. "Then it's my mistake to make." The answer hit harder than Victor expected. Not because of the words, because of the certainty, the complete certainty. Victor finally realized something important. Stephen wasn't confused, he wasn't manipulated, he wasn't lost. He had chosen, fully, deliberately, completely. And nothing Victor said was changing that. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Victor's face, just briefly, then it disappeared, replacing itself with determination. Because if persuasion wouldn't work, Victor would have to find another way. And unfortunately, his next move would place Naomi directly in the path of judgment she never deserved. Naomi had spent most of her life learning how to ignore judgment, not because it didn't hurt, because she had no choice. People made assumptions quickly, especially when they saw a young woman raising a child alone. They rarely asked questions, rarely listened, rarely cared enough to understand the full story. Most days Naomi handled it well. She focused on work, focused on Mary, focused on building a good life. But after the engagement announcement, the attention became harder to avoid. Much harder. One Saturday morning, Naomi and Mary were shopping in Richmond. The little girl sat inside the grocery cart happily holding a stuffed frog. Stephen was supposed to join them later. He had an early business call. For once, the morning felt completely normal, until Naomi noticed people staring. Not everyone, just enough. A glance here, a whisper there, a second look. The kind that lingered a little too long. At first she ignored it. Then she overheard part of a conversation. "That's her, the billionaire's fiancée, single mother." The words were quiet, but not quiet enough. Naomi continued walking. Her smile remained intact. Her posture remained steady. Yet her grip tightened slightly on the shopping cart. Mary looked up. "Mommy?" Naomi immediately softened. Yes, sweetheart? Can we get cookies? Naomi laughed despite herself. Of course. The little girl grinned. Problem solved. Mary had a remarkable ability to make the world feel smaller, simpler, kinder. For a few moments, Naomi forgot about the whispers, forgot about the attention, forgot about everything except her daughter. Unfortunately, the attention wasn't disappearing. If anything, it was growing. A few days later, Naomi attended a community event connected to the school. Parents gathered in the auditorium. Students performed presentations. Teachers circulated through the crowd. Everything started normally. Then somebody recognized her engagement ring. Within minutes, the questions started. Some were polite. Others weren't. What's it like dating someone that wealthy? Are you moving away? Will you stop working? How did you meet him? Naomi answered patiently, kindly. But eventually, one question changed the atmosphere. A woman smiled. The smile didn't reach her eyes. Do you ever worry people might think you're with him for his money? For a second, the room became painfully quiet. The woman looked pleased with herself, as though she had asked something clever. Naomi felt heat rise into her cheeks. Not from embarrassment, from disappointment, because even now, after everything, people still reduced her life to assumptions. She forced a smile, then answered calmly, If money was my goal, I chose a very difficult path. A few people laughed. The woman didn't. Naomi continued, I fell in love with Stephen because of who he is. Her voice remained steady. Not because of what he owns. The conversation ended there, but the feeling remained. That night, Naomi sat quietly on her apartment balcony. The city lights shimmered beyond the rooftops. For once, she wasn't reading, wasn't working, wasn't planning, just thinking. Stephen arrived 20 minutes later. The moment he saw her expression, he knew something was wrong. He sat beside her. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, he broke the silence. What happened? Naomi stared toward the city. Nothing. Stephen raised an eyebrow. That answer never worked on him. Try again. A small smile appeared, then disappeared. Slowly, she told him everything. The whispers, the comments, the assumptions, the question at the school event. Stephen listened without interrupting. The longer he listened, the angrier he became, not visibly, not loudly. But Naomi noticed. His jaw tightened, his shoulders stiffened, his eyes darkened. When she finished, silence settled between them. Stephen finally spoke. They don't know you. Naomi looked down. No. They don't know how hard you work. No. They don't know what you've sacrificed. Again she shook her head. Stephen leaned forward, frustration creeping into his voice. They don't know anything. Naomi laughed softly, a tired laugh. People usually prefer assumptions. Stephen looked at her, really looked at her. Then he reached over and gently took her hand. Not me. Naomi's eyes immediately met his. Stephen squeezed her fingers. I know exactly who you are. The words settled deeply inside her, because unlike everyone else, he actually did. At that exact moment, tiny footsteps appeared from the hallway. Mary. The little girl rubbed sleep from her eyes, holding her stuffed frog. Without saying a word, she climbed directly into Naomi's lap, then curled against her chest. Comfortable, safe, home. Naomi wrapped both arms around her daughter, instinctively. The tension eased immediately. Stephen smiled. Mary always seemed to appear at exactly the right moment. The little girl yawned dramatically, then looked up at Stephen. Are you sad? Stephen blinked. Children noticed everything, even things adults tried to hide. A little. Mary thought about that, then reached toward him. Stephen moved closer. The toddler gently pressed her tiny hand against his cheek. Exactly the way Naomi often did. The gesture lasted only seconds. Yet neither adult would forget it, ever. Because there was something incredibly pure about it. No judgment, no expectations, no conditions, just love. Simple love. Stephen smiled. Thanks. Mary nodded, then immediately fell asleep again. Naomi laughed quietly. She solved that fast. Stephen chuckled. Better than most adults. The following week brought an opportunity that should have been impossible to refuse. A major international expansion project. One Victor had wanted Stephen to lead for months. The assignment came with enormous benefits, more influence, more power, more money. It would also require relocation overseas for nearly 2 years. The timing couldn't have been worse. Stephen sat inside a conference room reviewing the proposal. The numbers were staggering. Any executive in the country would have jumped at the opportunity. Victor certainly expected him to. By the end of the meeting, everyone waited for Stephen's answer. Victor looked particularly confident, as though the decision had already been made. Stephen closed the folder, calmly, then spoke. "I'm declining." The room froze. Victor stared. Several executives exchanged confused looks. One of them actually blinked twice. Certain he had misheard. Victor recovered first. "Excuse me?" Stephen remained composed. "I'm declining." The silence became uncomfortable. Victor's expression hardened. "This project would transform the company." Stephen nodded. "I know. It would transform your career." "I know." Victor leaned forward. "Then why?" Stephen didn't hesitate. Because he already knew the answer. "I don't want to leave Richmond." The room became even quieter. Victor's face darkened immediately. Stephen continued. "I don't want to leave Naomi." A pause. "Or Mary." Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Victor looked as though he had been personally insulted. Perhaps he felt that way. For him, Stephen had just chosen family over ambition. Chosen love over expansion. Chosen people over profit. Stephen stood, collected the proposal, and handed it back. His voice remained calm, certain, final. "I already have everything I'm looking for." Then he walked out, leaving Victor staring after him, more frustrated than ever, because for the first time in his life, his son was becoming a man Victor could no longer influence. And that realization was pushing Victor closer and closer toward a decision that would change everything. The rejection of the international expansion proposal reached Victor's office before the end of the day. By sunset, half the executive floor was talking about it. Not openly, not loudly, but the news spread. Stephen Cole had turned down one of the biggest opportunities of his career, and everyone knew why. Victor sat alone in his office staring at the city skyline. The lights of Manhattan stretched endlessly beyond the glass. Normally the view helped him think. Tonight it only irritated him. His son's words replayed repeatedly in his mind. "I already have everything I'm looking for." Victor leaned back in his chair. For years he had taught Stephen that success required sacrifice, that greatness required discipline, that building an empire demanded complete commitment. Now Stephen was rejecting that philosophy entirely, not because he lacked ambition, because he valued something else more. Victor hated that realization, not because he didn't understand it, because deep down part of him did, and that made it harder to dismiss. His phone sat silently on the desk. For several minutes he simply stared at it, thinking, calculating, debating. Then finally he picked it up and called Stephen. The answer came almost immediately. "Hi, Dad." Victor got straight to the point. "We need to talk." Stephen sighed softly. He already knew this wouldn't be pleasant. "When?" "Tomorrow." "About what?" "You know exactly about what." The call ended less than a minute later. Neither man bothered pretending anymore. The following afternoon they met inside Victor's private office. The atmosphere felt different from their previous conversations. More serious, more final. Stephen noticed it immediately. Victor remained standing beside the window, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. Stephen closed the door behind him. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Victor turned around. "What do you want?" Stephen frowned. The question caught him off guard. "What? What do you want?" Victor's voice remained calm, controlled. Stephen folded his arms. "I already told you." "No." Victor shook his head. "You told me who?" The room fell quiet. Victor stepped forward. "What do you actually want your life to become?" Stephen thought about the question, then answered honestly, "A family." Victor looked disappointed. Not angry, disappointed, and somehow that felt worse. "A family," Stephen nodded. "Yes." Victor laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because he couldn't believe what he was hearing. I spent decades building opportunities for you. There it is again, Stephen's voice sharpened. Victor ignored the interruption. You could lead one of the largest companies in the country. I still can. You could influence entire industries. I still can. You could leave a legacy. Stephen took a slow breath, then answered quietly. Maybe my legacy won't be a company. Victor stared at him. Stephen continued, maybe it'll be the family I build. The words landed heavily. Victor looked away, toward the city, toward the empire he had dedicated his life to creating, toward everything he believed mattered most. When he finally spoke again, his voice had changed. It sounded colder, harder, more dangerous. If you marry her. Stephen immediately knew where this was going. The room seemed smaller, the silence thicker. Victor continued, if you marry Naomi and take responsibility for that child. Stephen's eyes narrowed. Mary has a name. Victor ignored him. Then you are choosing a life I cannot support. Stephen stood perfectly still. Victor wasn't finished. You will lose my financial backing. No reaction. You will lose my professional support. Still no reaction. You will lose any special position waiting for you inside this company. Nothing. Victor frowned. That wasn't the response he expected. Most people would have hesitated. Most people would have negotiated. Stephen simply listened. Calmly, quietly, completely unmoved. Victor finally asked the question, do you understand what I'm saying? Stephen nodded. Yes. And? Stephen met his father's gaze. For a moment neither looked away. Then Stephen spoke. His voice remained steady, certain, final. I choose Naomi. The answer hit the room like a hammer. Victor blinked once, then again, as though he genuinely couldn't process what he had heard. Stephen continued, I choose Naomi. A pause. And I choose Mary. Another pause. They are my family. Victor's jaw tightened. Years of authority, years of control, years of influence. None of it mattered, because his son had already made his choice. The conversation ended shortly afterward, not because either man was satisfied, because there was nothing left to say. When Stephen left the office, Victor remained standing by the window, alone, watching the city, watching a future he no longer controlled. Meanwhile, several hundred miles away in Richmond, Naomi knew nothing about the ultimatum. She was busy planning what she hoped would be a peaceful engagement dinner, a chance for both families to spend time together, a chance to reduce tension, a chance to create a fresh start. The idea sounded reasonable, at least on paper. Reality would prove much different. That evening Naomi spread several pages across her kitchen table. Guest lists, menu options, seating arrangements, schedules. The planning process had become more complicated than she expected. Mary sat beside her, coloring enthusiastically. Every few minutes the little girl offered suggestions. Most involved cake, or balloons, or both. Naomi smiled. What are you drawing? Mary held up the page proudly. 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, one very small, and a large yellow sun. Naomi laughed. Who's that? Mary pointed. Me. Then another figure, Mommy, then the tallest figure. Daddy. Naomi's smile softened immediately. She looked at the drawing longer than necessary, then kissed the top of Mary's head. A short time later, Stephen arrived. The moment he entered the apartment, Mary sprinted toward him. Daddy! Stephen caught her effortlessly, spinning her around, making her laugh. The stress of the ultimatum remained hidden behind his smile. For now, Naomi noticed he seemed tired. But she assumed work was responsible. Not Victor, not yet. The 3 spent the evening discussing engagement plans. Guest lists grew, then shrank, then grew again. At one point Stephen suggested something simple, very simple. Naomi liked the idea, but she still hoped the engagement dinner could help repair the growing distance between Stephen and Victor. That hope remained alive. Barely, yet alive. As the days passed, preparations continued. The restaurant was selected, invitations finalized, schedules arranged. Everything slowly came together. On the surface, things appeared stable. Underneath, pressure continued building. Victor had accepted the invitation. That surprised Stephen. It surprised Naomi, too. Part of her considered it a positive sign. Maybe Victor was softening. Maybe he wanted peace. Maybe he wanted another chance. Stephen wasn't convinced. Something felt wrong. Not obvious, not dramatic. Just wrong. The feeling stayed with him, growing stronger as the dinner approached. 3 days before the event, he found himself staring at the invitation again. Thinking. Questioning. Wondering. Naomi noticed. "You okay?" Stephen forced a smile. "Yeah." She studied him. Not fully convinced, but she let it go. For now. That night, after Naomi and Mary fell asleep, Stephen stood alone on the balcony. The city was quiet, the air cool, his thoughts restless. He wanted the dinner to work, wanted peace, wanted reconciliation, wanted his father to finally see what he saw, the goodness in Naomi, the joy in Mary, the family waiting right in front of him. Yet something deep inside refused to settle, as though a storm was approaching, as though the coming dinner would become something far bigger than a celebration. And unfortunately, that feeling was right, because in only a few days, one dinner table, one decision, and one unexpected arrival would change all of their lives forever. The night of the engagement dinner arrived faster than anyone expected. By late afternoon, Naomi stood in front of her bedroom mirror trying to calm her nerves. The dress wasn't extravagant. She didn't want extravagant. She wanted simple, elegant, comfortable. Most importantly, she wanted tonight to feel like a beginning, not a battle. Behind her, Mary sat on the floor playing with her stuffed frog. The little girl wore a tiny dress that Naomi had spent nearly a month saving to buy. Every few minutes, Mary twirled, then laughed, then twirled again. Naomi smiled despite her anxiety. "You look beautiful." Mary immediately stopped spinning. "You too." Naomi laughed. "Thank you." Mary pointed toward the door. "Daddy coming?" The word still warmed Naomi's heart every time she heard it. "Yes, sweetheart." Mary grinned. "Good." For Mary, that answer solved everything. Unfortunately, adults carried more complicated worries. Across town, Stephen adjusted his tie for the 3rd time, then the 4th, then the 5th. He stared at his reflection. Not because he cared how he looked, because his instincts refused to settle. Something about tonight bothered him. The feeling had been growing for days. Victor's sudden acceptance of the invitation, his unusual silence, his unwillingness to discuss the engagement, none of it felt right. Stephen's phone buzzed. A picture arrived. Naomi and Mary standing together, both smiling, both excited. The moment he saw them, his tension eased slightly. Whatever happened tonight, he reminded himself of something important. They were worth it. Every challenge, every argument, every sacrifice, all of it. An hour later, Stephen arrived at Naomi's apartment. The door opened before he could knock. Mary launched herself toward him. "Daddy!" Stephen laughed, catching her effortlessly. The little girl immediately wrapped both arms around his neck. "You look pretty." Stephen smiled. "That's usually what people say to girls." Mary shrugged. "You still look pretty." Naomi burst into laughter from the doorway. Stephen surrendered. "Fair enough." Then his eyes found Naomi. For a second, everything else disappeared. The apartment, the noise, the anxiety, all of it, all of it. "Too much?" Stephen shook his head. Not once, not twice, immediately. "No." His voice softened. "You look perfect." Naomi felt her cheeks warm, even after everything they had shared. Moments like that still affected her. Stephen stepped closer, gently taking her hand. "You ready?" Naomi looked toward Mary, then back at Stephen. Not entirely, but she nodded anyway. "As ready as I'll ever be." The drive to the restaurant felt surprisingly quiet. Mary eventually fell asleep in her car seat. Stephen focused on the road. Naomi watched the city lights pass outside her window, both lost in their thoughts. Neither wanting to say what they were thinking, because both were worried, just for different reasons. The restaurant stood near the center of Richmond. Historic, elegant, warmly lit. Exactly the kind of place Naomi had hoped would create a welcoming atmosphere. As they entered, several guests had already arrived. Conversations filled the room. Laughter echoed between tables. For a brief moment Naomi relaxed. Maybe she had worried for nothing. Maybe tonight would work. Maybe everyone could move forward. Stephen squeezed her hand, as if sensing exactly what she was thinking. The first 30 minutes passed smoothly, much smoother than expected. People greeted them warmly. Several guests congratulated them. Mary quickly became the center of attention. The toddler accepted the role enthusiastically. At one point she convinced two adults to admire a drawing she had made, then demanded applause. She received it, of course. Stephen watched Naomi laugh. Really laugh. And for the first time all evening, he allowed himself to hope. Then Victor arrived. The temperature in the room seemed to change instantly. Not dramatically. Subtly. Conversations softened, postures stiffened, attention shifted. Victor entered wearing a dark tailored suit. His expression revealed nothing, not anger, not happiness. Nothing. Stephen immediately stood. Naomi followed. Victor approached slowly. The silence around the table grew noticeable, uncomfortable. Stephen extended his hand. Victor accepted it, briefly. Formally, nothing more. Then Victor looked toward Naomi. She offered a polite smile. "Good evening." Victor nodded. "Naomi." Openly hostile. Naomi told herself that was progress. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Dinner began. People talked. Servers moved between tables. Plates arrived. For nearly 20 minutes, everything remained civil. Then the conversation shifted toward family. The subject appeared harmless. At first, one guest asked Stephen about future plans. Another mentioned children. A third joked about expanding the family. Naomi smiled politely. Stephen laughed. Then Victor placed his fork down. The sound was small, yet somehow everyone heard it. Stephen immediately looked up. Victor sat motionless, eyes fixed on the table, his expression unreadable. The room slowly grew quieter. Naomi felt her stomach tighten. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Victor finally spoke, his voice calm, too calm. "Children." Nobody answered. Victor looked directly at Stephen, then at Naomi, then at Mary. The little girl sat happily eating mashed sweet potatoes, completely unaware. Victor's jaw tightened, and suddenly months of frustration exploded. "You really intend to do this?" The room fell silent. Stephen's expression hardened immediately. "Dad." Victor ignored him. His eyes remained fixed on Naomi, on Mary, on everything he had spent months trying to stop. "You are willing to throw away your future?" Stephen slowly set down his glass. Every instinct told him where this was heading. Unfortunately, he was right. Victor stood. The movement drew every eye in the room. Then came the words Naomi would never forget. "A single mother." The room froze. Victor's voice rose. "You are risking everything for a single mother." Naomi stopped breathing. Stephen's chair moved sharply backward. "Dad." Victor pointed toward the table, toward Naomi, toward Mary, toward the family Stephen had chosen. "This is what you want representing our family?" Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The humiliation landed like a physical blow. Naomi felt dozens of eyes turned toward her. Some shocked, some uncomfortable, some unable to look at her at all. For a second she couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't even think. Then she felt Stephen's hand close firmly around hers. The gesture pulled her back, grounded her, protected her. Stephen rose slowly to his feet. His eyes locked onto Victor's. The room waited, the tension thick enough to make every heartbeat feel louder. And when Stephen finally spoke, his voice carried across the entire dining room. "That's enough." Stephen's voice cut through the dining room. "That's enough." The room became completely silent. Even the servers had stopped moving. Nobody touched their food. Nobody spoke. Every eye remained fixed on the confrontation unfolding at the center of the room. Victor stared at his son. For a brief moment it looked as though he might sit back down, as though reason might finally return. It didn't. Months of frustration had finally reached the surface. Months of disappointment. Months of watching Stephen move further away from the future Victor had imagined. And now, standing before him, was the reality he refused to accept. Stephen stepped closer. His voice remained calm, controlled, but there was steel beneath it. You don't get to speak about Naomi like that. Victor laughed once, a short laugh, cold. Why not? Stephen's jaw tightened. Because she's the woman I'm marrying. Victor's expression darkened. And that's exactly the problem. Naomi felt her stomach sink. The attention of the entire room seemed focused on her. Every whisper, every glance, every uncomfortable expression. For years she had learned how to endure judgment. But this felt different, because this wasn't coming from a stranger. This was coming from the man who was supposed to become family. Mary shifted in her high chair. The little girl sensed something was wrong. She looked from Naomi to Stephen to Victor, confused, uncertain. Her tiny fingers tightened around her spoon. Mommy? The single word broke Naomi's heart. She immediately reached for her daughter. It's okay, sweetheart. But her voice trembled slightly. Mary noticed. Children always noticed. Victor wasn't finished, not even close. He pointed towards Stephen. I gave you every opportunity. Stephen remained silent. I built a future for you. Still silent. I spent decades creating something you could inherit. The room listened. Nobody dared interrupt. Victor continued. And now you're throwing it away. Stephen shook his head slowly. No. Victor frowned. No? I'm choosing what matters. The answer made Victor visibly angrier, because Stephen wasn't arguing, wasn't defending himself, wasn't apologizing. He was simply standing firm, and Victor had never been good at handling resistance, especially from his own son. The older man took a step forward, his voice rising. What matters? His eyes shifted toward Naomi, her, then toward Mary. That child? The words landed heavily. Naomi immediately looked down, not because she felt ashamed, because she didn't want Mary seeing the pain in her eyes. Stephen's expression changed instantly. The room felt colder, dangerously cold. For the first time that evening, genuine anger appeared on his face, not the anger of embarrassment, the anger of a man watching someone hurt the people he loved. Don't. Victor folded his arms. Don't what? Talk about Mary like that. Victor scoffed. Why? Stephen took another step forward. Because she is my daughter. The room froze. Several guests visibly reacted. Even Naomi looked up. Stephen rarely made public declarations. This one carried enormous weight. His voice remained steady. I love her. He glanced toward Mary. The little girl stared back at him, wide-eyed, listening, trying to understand. Stephen softened immediately, then looked back at Victor. And I love Naomi. The silence that followed stretched painfully. Victor's face hardened further, if possible. He looked almost betrayed, as though every word Stephen spoke confirmed his worst fears. Then came the moment neither of them could take back. Victor straightened his shoulders. His voice lowered, which somehow made it more frightening. You are making a mistake. Stephen didn't respond. Victor continued, a life-changing mistake. Still no response. Then Victor delivered the words that would echo for years. If you walk down this path. The room held its breath. Then you walk it alone. Naomi's heart pounded. Stephen stood perfectly still. Victor looked directly into his son's eyes and spoke with brutal finality. Marry Naomi. A pause. Raise her child. Another pause. But from this moment forward, the room became so quiet that even breathing sounded loud. Victor's voice thundered across the dining room. You are no longer my son. A gasp escaped from somewhere across the room. Several guests looked away, others stared openly. Nobody could believe what they had just heard. Naomi felt the air leave her lungs. The words struck with shocking force, not because she disliked Victor, because she knew exactly what Stephen was losing. A father, a family, a lifetime of history, all because he chose love. Mary looked confused. The little girl didn't understand the meaning, but she understood pain. She could hear it in voices, see it in faces, feel it in the atmosphere. Slowly she reached toward Stephen. Daddy? The tiny voice shattered whatever composure remained. Stephen immediately crossed the distance, lifting her into his arms, holding her tightly. Mary wrapped her arms around his neck, instinctively, trusting him completely. The sight made several guests lower their eyes. Because regardless of what anyone thought, the love between them was obvious, real, undeniable. Victor saw it too. Yet instead of softening, his expression hardened further, as though admitting the truth would require admitting he was wrong. Naomi could barely stay seated. The humiliation, the tension, the heartbreak, it all crashed into her at once. Slowly she pushed her chair backward. Stephen noticed immediately. "Naomi," she shook her head, unable to speak. Her eyes filled with tears, not loud tears, not dramatic tears, the kind people fight desperately to hide. "I should go." Stephen's face fell. "What?" Naomi stood, hands trembling slightly. "This is my fault." "No." Stephen's answer came instantly. "No, it isn't." She looked away, because she couldn't bear seeing the pain in his eyes. "If I wasn't here—" "Stop!" His voice was firm, stronger than before. Naomi froze. Stephen moved toward her, still holding Mary, still refusing to let either of them face this alone. "None of this is your fault." The room listened, every guest, every employee, every witness. Stephen looked directly at Naomi, then spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "I choose you." Naomi blinked. A tear slipped down her cheek. Stephen didn't care who was watching, didn't care about appearances, didn't care about consequences. "I chose you before tonight." His voice softened. "I'll choose you tomorrow." Another pause. "And every day after that." The room became painfully emotional. Several guests looked visibly affected, even those who had remained neutral all evening, because there was something powerful about watching someone stand by the people they loved, especially when it cost them everything. Naomi stared at him, unable to speak, unable to look away. For one brief moment the rest of the room disappeared. The humiliation, the whispers, the judgment, all of it faded. Only Stephen remained. Then suddenly, the dining room doors opened, and every head in the room turned. The dining room doors opened. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The tension that had consumed the room seemed to freeze in place. Stephen still stood beside Naomi. Mary remained in his arms. Victor remained rigid near the table. Every guest turned toward the entrance. A tall man stepped inside. His movements were calm, measured, unhurried. Unlike everyone else in the room, he didn't appear surprised by what he had walked into. He simply observed, taking in the silence, the expressions, the emotion hanging heavily in the air. His suit was perfectly tailored. His posture carried quiet authority, the kind that didn't need to announce itself, the kind that made people pay attention without understanding why. For a brief second, nobody recognized him. Then Naomi saw him, and everything stopped. Her breath caught. Her eyes widened. 1,000 emotions crossed her face at once. Relief, surprise, disbelief, emotion she couldn't even name. Found hers immediately. "Sorry I'm late." The familiar voice nearly brought tears to Naomi's eyes. Across the room, Stephen frowned, confused. He looked at Naomi, then back at the man. Something wasn't adding up. The stranger stepped forward, one step, then another. The room remained completely silent. Even Victor seemed uncertain. Then the newcomer glanced toward Mary. His expression softened instantly. "Well now." Mary blinked. The man smiled. "My goodness, you've gotten taller." The little girl stared, then smiled back automatically. Children had a remarkable ability to recognize kindness. Naomi suddenly laughed through her tears, a quiet laugh, an emotional one. The sound caught everyone's attention. The newcomer finally reached the table, then gently placed a hand on Naomi's shoulder. The gesture was simple, yet deeply personal, protective, familiar, loving. Stephen's confusion grew, because Naomi wasn't introducing the man, wasn't explaining anything. She simply looked at him with tears shining in her eyes, as though seeing him changed everything. The newcomer looked around the room. His smile remained polite, but there was something else beneath it now, something stronger, something serious. His gaze eventually settled on Victor. For the first time all evening, Victor looked uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. The newcomer extended his hand. "Good evening." Victor stared, his face slowly changing. Confusion became recognition. Recognition became disbelief. Disbelief became shock. Real shock, the kind that strips confidence away in seconds. Victor didn't take the hand immediately. He simply stared. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Finally, a name escaped his lips. Nathaniel Harper. The room reacted instantly. Several guests exchanged looks. Others whispered. Some recognized the name immediately. Others needed a moment. Stephen felt his heartbeat quicken. Harper. The surname hit him first. Harper. The same surname Naomi carried. Slowly, Stephen looked toward Naomi, then back at the man, then back at Naomi again. The realization arrived all at once. And it hit like lightning. No, it couldn't be. Could it? The newcomer smiled gently. Good to see you again, Victor. Victor looked as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. Stephen had never seen his father look like that. Not once, not ever. Victor swallowed, hard. You. For the first time that evening, Victor seemed unable to form a complete sentence. The man nodded. Yes, the room waited, nobody daring to interrupt. Then Nathaniel Harper looked toward Naomi. His expression immediately softened. The hardness disappeared. The authority disappeared. In that moment, he wasn't a respected judge. He wasn't a powerful legal figure. He was simply a father. A father looking at his daughter. Are you all right? Naomi nodded, but tears immediately filled her eyes. Nathaniel noticed. Of course he noticed. Fathers notice things like that, especially fathers who know their children well. His gaze shifted slowly toward Stephen, then toward Mary, then finally back toward Victor, and suddenly the atmosphere changed. Not louder, not more dramatic, more serious. Much more serious. Because Victor now understood exactly what had happened. Every word he had spoken, every insult, every assumption, every cruel remark. He hadn't merely humiliated Naomi. He had humiliated the daughter of Judge Nathaniel Harper, a man whose reputation for fairness and integrity was known throughout Virginia, a man Victor had encountered professionally before, a man currently connected to legal proceedings involving coal enterprises. Victor's face lost color. Stephen saw it happen. Naomi saw it happen. Everyone saw it happen. Nathaniel remained calm, almost unbelievably calm. That somehow made the moment even more powerful. He looked around the room, then spoke quietly. I hope I'm not interrupting dinner. Nobody laughed. Nobody even smiled. The statement landed differently, because everyone knew exactly what he was doing. He was offering grace, offering dignity, offering Victor a chance to recover. Victor couldn't even look him in the eye. The older billionaire suddenly seemed much smaller than he had 20 minutes earlier. Nathaniel finally looked toward Stephen. A warm smile appeared. You must be Stephen. Stephen nodded immediately. Yes, sir. Nathaniel extended his hand. Stephen accepted it. The handshake felt firm, respectful, genuine. Nathaniel studied him for a moment, then smiled. My daughter speaks very highly of you. Stephen felt emotion tighten in his chest, because after everything that had happened tonight, those words meant more than Nathaniel probably realized. Nathaniel glanced toward Mary. The little girl immediately reached for him. The reaction surprised everyone, including Nathaniel. He laughed softly, then gently took her hand. Mary smiled, satisfied, as though she had already approved him. Nathaniel chuckled. Well, aren't you friendly? Mary nodded seriously. The room finally released a little tension, just a little. Then Nathaniel turned back toward Victor, and the tension returned instantly. Victor looked down. Something nobody in that room ever expected to witness. Victor Cole looked ashamed, truly ashamed, not embarrassed. Ashamed. Nathaniel's voice remained calm, steady, controlled. I arrived because my daughter invited me. Victor said nothing. Nathaniel continued. I expected to celebrate an engagement. Still nothing. Nathaniel looked briefly toward Naomi, then toward Stephen, then back at Victor. His eyes hardened slightly, only slightly, but enough. Instead of anger, there was disappointment, and somehow that felt worse, much worse. Victor finally found his voice. The word died halfway out. Nathaniel waited. The entire room waited. Victor looked toward Naomi, then toward Mary, then toward Stephen. For the first time all evening, he truly saw them. Not labels, not assumptions, not obstacles, people, a family. The realization struck hard, painfully hard, and in that moment, Victor understood something he should have understood months ago. The woman he had judged was kind, the child he had dismissed was innocent, and the son he had pushed away had been right all along. The dining room remained silent. Nobody seemed willing to move. Nobody seemed willing to speak. The energy that had filled the room earlier was gone. The celebration, the laughter, the excitement, all of it had disappeared beneath the weight of what had just happened. Nathaniel Harper stood calmly beside Naomi, one hand resting lightly on the back of her chair. Not possessive, not dramatic, protective. The gesture alone said more than any speech could. Stephen remained beside Naomi as well. Mary rested comfortably against his shoulder. The little girl looked sleepy now, confused by the tension, but comforted by the familiar arms holding her. Victor stood across the table, alone. For perhaps the first time in his life he had no control over the room, no authority, no influence, no advantage, only consequences. Nathaniel looked around the dining room. His expression remained composed, measured, the same composure that had made him respected throughout his career. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. I think everyone here has experienced enough discomfort for one evening. The statement wasn't directed at anyone in particular, yet everyone knew who it was for. Victor lowered his eyes. The reaction didn't go unnoticed. Stephen had never seen his father do that before, not once. Nathaniel continued. Come here as a judge. His gaze briefly moved toward Victor, then back toward Naomi. I came here as a father. The room listened carefully. Nobody wanted to miss a word. Nathaniel looked toward his daughter. A softness entered his expression, the kind only family could bring out. When Naomi was young, her mother and I taught her something important. Naomi's eyes immediately filled. Nathaniel smiled gently. We taught her that a person's character matters more than their circumstances. A brief pause. We taught her that kindness matters more than status. Another pause. And we taught her that dignity should never depend on income, titles, or public opinion. Several guests lowered their eyes. The message landed exactly where it needed to. Nathaniel wasn't raising his voice. He wasn't attacking anyone, which somehow made every word stronger. Victor swallowed, hard, because every sentence exposed the mistake he had made. Every assumption, every judgment, every cruel word. Nathaniel finally turned fully toward Victor. The room became even quieter, if that was possible. Victor straightened slightly, almost instinctively, preparing for criticism, preparing for anger, preparing for punishment. Instead, Nathaniel surprised everyone, including Victor. I know what it feels like to worry about your children. Victor blinked. Nathaniel continued, I know what it feels like to want the best for them. But there comes an understanding, not expecting empathy. Nathaniel's voice remained steady. But there comes a moment when parents must decide whether they love their plans more than they love their children. The words struck like a hammer. Not because they were loud, because they were true. Stephen looked down. The statement affected him too. For years he had hoped his father would understand him. Really understand him. Not the executive, not the heir, not the future CEO. The son. Simply the son. Across the table, Victor's shoulders seemed to sag. Only slightly, yet enough for everyone to notice. Nathaniel took another breath, then looked toward Stephen, then Naomi, then Mary. The little girl had begun playing with one of Stephen's shirt buttons, completely unaware that she was helping teach the room a lesson. Nathaniel smiled. You see family. He nodded toward them. I see family too. The statement echoed through the room. Simple, direct, powerful. Victor stared at Mary. For the first time that evening, really stared. Not at the idea of her, not at the label he had assigned her. At the child, The little girl who had spent most of the night smiling, laughing, trusting, being exactly what she was, a child, nothing more, nothing less. The realization hurt. Because innocence had never been the problem, his pride had. Nathaniel eventually stepped closer, not aggressively, calmly, respectfully, until he stood directly across from Victor. The room held its breath. Victor couldn't look away. Nathaniel spoke quietly. Legal matters between us will remain exactly where they belong. Victor nodded slowly. Nathaniel continued. In a courtroom. Another nod. But this, his gaze shifted briefly toward Naomi, then Stephen, then Mary. This is family. The distinction mattered. Everyone understood it, especially Victor. For several seconds, the billionaire said nothing. His throat tightened, his thoughts raced. A lifetime of confidence suddenly felt worthless. Because wealth couldn't fix this. Power couldn't fix this. Influence couldn't fix this. Only humility could, and humility had never been easy for Victor Cole. Finally, he spoke. His voice sounded different. Smaller, softer, human. Naomi. The room froze. Nathaniel remained silent. Stephen remained silent. Everyone waited. Victor looked directly at her. Really looked at her. Perhaps for the first time. Not as an obstacle, not as a threat, not as a symbol. A person. A woman. A mother. A future member of his family. The shame on his face was impossible to hide. I owe you an apology. Naomi blinked. The words seemed difficult even for him to say. Victor continued, slowly, carefully. I judged you. A pause. Without knowing you. Another pause. I decided who you were before giving you the chance to show me. His voice cracked slightly. Only slightly, but enough. Enough for everyone to hear. Enough for everyone to understand that this wasn't performance, this wasn't strategy, this wasn't public relations, this was regret, real regret. Naomi remained quiet, listening. Victor looked toward Mary, then back at Naomi, and for the first time that evening, his eyes filled with genuine remorse. The apology lingered in the room long after Victor finished speaking. Nobody rushed to fill the silence, nobody interrupted. The moment deserved space. For years, Victor Cole had been the strongest voice in every room he entered. Tonight was different. Tonight he stood before Naomi with nothing except honesty. And honesty felt far heavier than authority ever had. Naomi looked at him quietly. She could see the struggle on his face, the discomfort, the regret, the realization. Part of her wanted to remember every painful word he had spoken. Every assumption, every humiliation, every moment he had made her feel unwelcome. But another part of her remembered something else. The values her parents had taught her. Grace, forgiveness, character. The things that mattered when life became difficult. Victor finally lowered his eyes. Something he almost never did. I was wrong. The words came slowly, painfully. Yet they were sincere. I spent months convincing myself I was protecting my son. He shook his head. But I never stopped to ask what he wanted. Stephen listened quietly. His father rarely admitted mistakes. Perhaps never like this. Victor looked toward him. I kept seeing you as my successor. A brief pause. When I should have been seeing you as my son. Stephen felt emotion tighten in his chest, because that was all he had ever wanted. Not approval, not inheritance, not control. Just understanding. Victor turned back toward Naomi, then toward Mary. The little girl now sat comfortably in Stephen's lap, playing with a napkin, completely unaware she was at the center of a life-changing conversation. Victor watched her for several seconds, then sighed. I judged a child. The admission seemed to hurt him, deeply. That may be the part I regret most. Nathaniel remained silent, allowing Victor to speak, allowing him to face the consequences of his own actions. For perhaps the first time in decades, no one was rescuing him. No one was protecting him from accountability. Victor had to stand inside the discomfort himself. And he did. Naomi finally spoke, her voice soft, gentle. I appreciate your apology. Victor looked relieved. Not forgiven, not yet, but relieved, because she was willing to listen. That mattered. A lot. The rest of the evening gradually settled. Conversations slowly returned. People relaxed. The tension loosened. Not completely, but enough. Nathaniel eventually sat beside Naomi. Stephen remained nearby. Mary somehow convinced 3 adults to admire her drawing again. The normal rhythm of life slowly returned. Yet beneath the surface, another issue remained unresolved. The antitrust case. The case connecting Nathaniel Harper and Cole Enterprises. The case Victor had spent months worrying about. The case that now carried even greater emotional weight. Several weeks passed. Winter slowly gave way to early spring. Richmond grew greener, warmer, brighter. Life moved forward. The engagement remained intact. Wedding plans continued. And surprisingly, so did Victor's efforts to rebuild trust. Not through speeches, not through promises, through actions, small actions, consistent actions, the difficult kind, the meaningful kind. He called Stephen, not to argue, to listen. He visited Richmond, not to interfere, to spend time. And perhaps most surprising of all, he made an effort with Mary. The first attempt was awkward. Extremely awkward. Victor handed her a stuffed animal. Mary looked at it, then looked at him, then looked at Stephen, then back at Victor. The room waited. Victor looked more nervous than he had during multi-million-dollar negotiations. Finally, Mary smiled. "Thank you." Victor nearly looked shocked, as though he expected rejection. Instead, he received acceptance, simple acceptance, because children often forgive faster than adults. The moment stayed with him, long afterward. Meanwhile, the legal case continued moving through the courts. Nathaniel remained exactly what he had always been. Professional, fair, disciplined. The relationship between their families changed nothing, and everyone knew it, especially Victor. One afternoon, several months after the engagement dinner, attorneys gathered for a final round of negotiations. The outcome wasn't perfect, but it was fair. Cole Enterprises agreed to make significant changes to several business practices. Necessary changes, long overdue changes. Victor wasn't thrilled, but he accepted them. Because deep down he knew the truth. The company would survive. The empire would survive. His pride was the only thing that had truly suffered, and perhaps that was a good thing. When the final agreements were completed, Nathaniel reviewed the documents carefully, methodically, exactly as he always did. No favoritism, no personal influence, only fairness. Victor watched from across the room, and for the first time he understood something important. Nathaniel Harper wasn't respected because of power. He was respected because of integrity. The realization stayed with him, long after the meeting ended, long after the paperwork was completed, long after everyone went home. That evening, Victor sat alone in his office, the same office where he had spent years chasing growth, profit, expansion, control. The city lights stretched endlessly beyond the windows. Yet tonight he wasn't thinking about business. He was thinking about family, about Stephen, about Naomi, about Mary, about the months he had nearly destroyed relationships that mattered, all because he couldn't let go of expectations. He thought about the engagement dinner, the shame, the regret, the lesson. Then he quietly laughed to himself. Not because anything was funny, because life had humbled him, and he needed it. A few days later, Victor drove to Richmond again. No assistants, no drivers, no business agenda, just Victor. When he arrived, Stephen opened the door. The moment felt awkward, honest, real. Victor cleared his throat. "I brought lunch." Stephen stared, then laughed. Actually laughed. Victor found himself smiling too, a rare thing these days. Inside, Naomi welcomed him warmly. Not cautiously, not reluctantly, warmly. That affected him more than he expected, because kindness feels different when you know you don't deserve it. Mary ran into the room a few moments later, immediately grabbing Victor's hand, without hesitation, without history, without resentment. "Come see my drawings." Victor blinked, then smiled. "Okay." The little girl practically dragged him away. Stephen watched the scene unfold, quietly, thoughtfully. Then Naomi slipped her hand into his. Both smiled, because after everything, the rebuilding had begun. Not perfectly, not instantly, but genuinely. And sometimes genuine healing matters more than perfect healing. For the first time in a very long time, the Cole family wasn't growing farther apart. They were finally finding their way back to one another. 6 weeks later, the Richmond courthouse stood beneath a bright Virginia sky. People moved through the historic building carrying folders, legal documents, and coffee cups. Lawyers hurried through hallways. Reporters waited near the entrance. Employees moved between offices. For most people, it was another ordinary workday. For Stephen, Naomi, Mary, Victor, and Nathaniel, it marked the final chapter of a journey that had changed all of their lives. Stephen stood beside Naomi near one of the courthouse windows. Their fingers remained intertwined. Not because either was nervous, because they had become accustomed to facing life's challenges together. Mary sat nearby coloring in a small notebook. Her stuffed frog rested beside her. Occasionally she looked up, then returned to her artwork, completely content. The little girl had no interest in court proceedings. She was busy creating masterpieces, at least according to her. Naomi watched her daughter for a moment, then smiled. There had been a time when she feared the future, a time when she wondered whether life would always feel like a struggle, whether she would always be judged before people knew her, whether she would always have to prove her worth. Now, standing beside Stephen, those fears felt far away, not because life had become perfect, because she had learned something important. The right people see your value without requiring proof. Stephen noticed her smile. What? Naomi shook her head softly. Nothing. He raised an eyebrow. That smile usually means something. She laughed. Maybe I'm just happy. Stephen leaned closer. Good answer. A familiar voice interrupted. I agree. Both turned. Victor approached slowly. A warm smile rested on his face. Not forced, not practiced, real. The change in him still surprised Stephen sometimes. Months earlier, this moment would have been impossible to imagine. Now it felt natural. Victor looked toward Naomi. How are you? I'm good. He nodded, then glanced toward Mary. The little girl immediately waved. Victor waved back. The exchange lasted only seconds, yet Stephen noticed it. Naomi noticed it. Because moments like that hadn't existed before. They existed now, and that mattered. The courtroom doors eventually opened. The final proceedings moved quickly. The agreements were approved. The legal process concluded. Cole Enterprises would move forward with important reforms. The case was officially finished. Nathaniel exited the courtroom carrying a folder beneath one arm. His expression remained composed, professional, the same expression he carried throughout the entire process. Victor approached him first. The two men stood facing each other. Months earlier, the tension between them had been obvious. Today felt different. Victor extended his hand. Nathaniel accepted it. The handshake lasted only a moment, yet it symbolized something larger. Respect, mutual understanding, growth. Victor smiled. Thank you. Nathaniel nodded. Fairness works best when everyone accepts it. Victor chuckled softly. I've learned that. Nathaniel smiled. So have many people. The exchange ended there. No grand speeches, no dramatic declarations, just respect. Sometimes respect says more than words ever could. Outside the courthouse, sunlight bathed the city in gold. The group slowly made their way toward the parking area. Mary skipped ahead, holding her stuffed frog, completely unaware that she was walking through the final pages of a story people would remember for years. Suddenly she stopped, turned around, and held up her notebook. Look! Everyone gathered around. Inside was a drawing, a familiar drawing, several stick figures, a bright yellow sun, and smiling faces. Mary pointed proudly. Family. The single word silenced everyone. Victor stared at the drawing longer than anyone else. Because months earlier, he wouldn't have been included in it. Now he was. His eyes softened. That's beautiful. Mary smiled proudly. I know. The confidence made everyone laugh. The tension disappeared completely. Later that evening, they gathered at Naomi's home for a celebration. Nothing extravagant, nothing expensive. Exactly the kind of gathering Naomi loved. The dining table filled with food, laughter echoed through the house. Conversations flowed naturally. No one was performing, no one was pretending. For the first time, everyone simply enjoyed being together. Stephen sat beside Naomi, their shoulders touching, their hands occasionally finding each other beneath the table. Neither needed words. The happiness was obvious. Across from them, Victor listened as Mary explained an incredibly complicated story involving her stuffed frog. Most of it made absolutely no sense. Victor listened anyway, completely focused, completely engaged. Nathaniel watched quietly, a smile appearing every now and then. The scene before him represented everything he valued. Family, character, respect, love, the things that remain when titles disappear. As evening settled over Richmond, the gathering slowly came to an end. Mary eventually fell asleep against Stephen's shoulder, one tiny hand still clutching her stuffed frog. Stephen looked down at her, then at Naomi, then around the room. A deep sense of gratitude settled inside him. Months earlier, he had been forced to choose. His father or his future, his inheritance or his heart, his comfort or his convictions. He had chosen love, and he would make that same choice again. Every single time. Naomi rested her head gently against his shoulder. Neither spoke, neither needed to. The journey had been difficult, painful at times, but worth it. Completely worth it. And before this story ends, we want to hear from you. Have you ever been judged before someone truly knew your story? Have you ever had to stand up for someone you loved when others didn't understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Mr. Obama Stories, and join our growing family of viewers who believe that kindness, courage, and respect still matter, because stories like these deserve to be shared. As the night grew quieter, Naomi looked around the room one final time, at Stephen, at Mary, at Nathaniel, at Victor, at the family they had built, and she realized something powerful. The richest person in the room wasn't the billionaire. The richest people in the room were the ones surrounded by love. That was the lesson hidden inside everything that had happened. Victor spent years believing wealth created value. Life eventually taught him otherwise. Nathaniel spent years teaching that character matters more than status. Life proved him right. Stephen showed that real strength means standing beside the people you love, even when doing so comes at a cost. And Naomi showed that dignity cannot be taken away by judgment, not when it comes from a heart built on kindness, integrity, and courage. The truth is simple. Money can buy houses, but not a home. Money can buy attention, but not respect. Money can buy comfort, but not love. Real wealth is found in the people who stand beside you when life becomes difficult. It is found in forgiveness when pride says, hold a grudge. It is found in compassion when judgment feels easier. It is found in choosing what is right even when it costs something. Victor nearly lost his son because he valued status over character. Stephen gained a family because he valued character over status. And Naomi never stopped being herself, even when others tried to define her by circumstances she could not control. In the end, that made all the difference. Because true honor is not measured by power. True honor is measured by how we treat people, especially those who can offer us nothing in return. And that is a kind of wealth no billionaire can ever purchase.